What was your biggest I freaking knew it moment? There was someone roughly in my PhD cohort who worked a few labs down the hall from me. They always seemed to get positive results with no protocol troubleshooting, and the results were always the sort of thing that journal editors look fondly upon. Somehow, this person was 2 times as productive as even the super smart 60 plus hour a week working creative grad students in other labs. Seriously, think about the smartest kid in your high school. It would be that person, but probably even more driven to work extreme hours. And this person won pretty much every graduate, then postdoc award you could get, and ended up a professor at a well-regarded university with a huge startup grant. A year into them starting their faculty position, their former postdoc lab, upon not being able to repeat any experiments or build on the data, figured out that the person had fabricated or fudged at least 60% of results that had been published in top-tier journals. We're talking outright fabrication, not just a slightly too contrast-enhanced micrograph or blot. They reported this to the funding agencies and there was a full investigation. They lost their grants and the university fired them. In talking to someone in the person's PhD lab, it turns out a similar thing happened and there were some really questionable Western blots that had been overly processed and cropped in ways that were definitely misleading. At least one master's student burned a year trying to build on that work and got nowhere. Turns out one of the golden children of my PhD program and someone who was featured by funding agencies as the next big thing had built their entire scientific career mostly on lies, and it took around 10 years for anyone to really catch on. There are some really great scientists who just happen to land on fruitful projects, but no one is that productive and lucky all the time. I'm just glad they didn't try to clone a dinosaur or something, right? You hear the Jurassic Park theme song in your head? Yeah, I do too. Story 2. My sister and I had a big fight, and after it escalated, I said to her, "You're not borrowing my dress that she needed to wear for a wedding. Find your own." A day later, I went to my cupboard to get my clothes out for the next day, and my dress was gone. I said to my parents, who I still lived with at the time, she had moved out, I still lived at the family home, "Has sister's name been over this morning?" Parents said no, they haven't seen her. I thought this was weird because that dress was always on its hanger. It can't just have disappeared out of thin air. I called my sister and said, "Did you take my dress?" She responded that this dress was very ugly and that she hadn't taken it. She didn't need it anymore since I was a witch and she'd bought her own, which was a lot nicer. I said, "Okie dokie, well, where's mine then? The exact one you wanted to borrow is missing now." She became irate and was furious that I was accusing her of stealing. I said, "Where else would it have gone?" She replied, "I better check my clothes pile in my filthy room," which wasn't filthy, by the way. It just had clothes on the floor because, well, where do clothes go when you're a messy 20-year-old? We had another argument, this time about the dress missing. She was adamant that I was extremely rude, accusing her of stealing. I was angry because she had slinked into my parents' house unbeknownst to any of us and taken it. Anyway, she goes to the wedding, posts a photo of her outfit, and indeed, it's not the dress that is missing, it's a different dress. And then 1 week later, we'd sorted out our differences and she demanded an apology for the accusations of stealing. So we sort things out, I apologize, and we're cool. I go to her house after work, and at this time I'm working in hospitality, so the usual routine is that I come over to hang out, but I change into some pants and another of her shirts just to be comfortable. So it's normal for me to grab something out of her closet. This time she flies into her room and pushes me out of the way, saying, "How dare I go through her things?" I say, "What are you on about? I'm getting some pants." She says, "I don't go to your house and wear your things." I said, "Why are you hysterical about this? What's in there?" And it dawns on me, it's my dress, isn't it? The one you made me apologize for accusing you of stealing? Her boyfriend at the time, who was laying in the bed, said, "The gig is up, sister's name, just give it to her." She couldn't believe he would oust her like he just did and became irate at this point. So I pulled her out of the way, flung her cupboard doors open, and there it was, my dress. She really had snuck into the back door of my parents' house and taken it when I was right down the other end of the house, snuck out again and gone home with it. I looked back at her and said, "I freaking knew it." Story 3. I always had a certain feeling about a former coworker in the accounting department. Just a sneaking, shady vibe I couldn't shake. One day, the head of HR accidentally printed a document that showed the salary and raise, bonus, profit-sharing structure of every single employee to a shared printer instead of his office printer, and I found it. Shady coworker was getting paid way less than I expected her to be making for all the work she was legitimately doing. Like, despite my suspicion about her, she was actually a seemingly good employee and had worked her way up to a role with significant responsibility. The moment I saw her pay structure, I knew she was making money off the company in other ways. There was no way she was settling for that salary after being there for so many years and for the work she did. I just knew. Fast forward a few years, and turns out she'd been embezzling significant amounts of money from the company, submitted false expense reports to pay for everything from groceries to gas to food delivery to vacations, and no one caught it because she was the head of the department. All came to light when a new junior employee saw a suspicious Amazon expense and brought it to the COO. Investigation led to the discovery of tens of thousands of dollars in embezzled funds. I quit soon after the discovery, but I hear they're pressing criminal charges against her. Somehow, I just knew. Story 4. I went to a naval school with a guy who creeped me the hell out. Things he said went beyond locker room language, and his jokes were very dark and disturbing, but everyone said he was just kind of edgy or whatever, and nobody seemed bothered by the same vibes I was getting. He ended up at my command when he got kicked out of his, and I was quickly picking up the same vibes. He made dark jokes, he talked a little too reverently about crimes, but the guys at my command wrote it off, and again he was planted firmly in my friend group. Then we got back from deployment, and the first night he got hammered on Everclear and tried to mistreat his roommate. The poor kid was able to get away, thank God. He tried to fight the police when they came, saying, "Just end me, just freaking end me." Obviously, he never came back to the command. His roommate didn't either. It seriously messed him up. And everyone was just so shocked. Anyway, he was discharged and out of jail a year or two later. Last I saw of him was on FB. He had a clown as his pick and was still friends with some of the guys I served with. I heard he got busted after that. Story 5. When my son was 14, he lost 30 pounds within a few months. I wasn't terribly concerned out of the gate because he did start on the heavy side and also because he seemed to be working for weight loss. However, he went to Mexico for a week with his dad and came back 10 pounds lighter, and alarm bells started going off because my brother is a type 1 diabetic. Kiddo had an awful migraine-like headache, so I decided to take him to his pediatrician to have a test sugar run. I expressed my concerns and the doctor poo-pooed me, spending a lot of time congratulating my son on his weight loss. She was resistant to running a sugar, but I insisted, sure enough, type 1 diabetes with a dangerous sugar of nearly 500. Sometimes moms just know. Also, screw that doc. Yep, sometimes being a mom is like a mind-reading superhero. Story 6. A guy in HR at a company I used to work for always gave me the creeps from the first time I met him. It was something in his body language and his voice that just felt a little weird. And I dreaded any time I had to speak with him, and I made sure to never be alone with him. One day, the police show up to the front desk quietly asking where his office is. They fanned out through the whole building. People saw them on all the floors posted by the stairwells, elevators, and exits. It was so strange. They brought him out in handcuffs with no audible discussion, and they were gone as quickly as they arrived. Months later, we find out from the news that he owned a few rental properties and was accused of mistreating one of his tenants. He also had cameras set up in the bedrooms and bathrooms of his rentals and filmed his tenants. Apparently, the reason for the response was that he sent messages from his work computer threatening to terminate the tenant he mistreated. Story 7. About 15 years ago, I was hired to assist on an inventory and appraisal of the wine collection of a guy who lived in the Caribbean and ran a bank there, specializing in selling long-term high-yield CDs. So I went down and spent a week doing that and spending time with him and some of his very few employees, none of whom seemed to do very much work at all. As soon as I got back up, I set up Google alerts for the guy's name and a Ponzi scheme. A month later, it started going off like crazy. He'd been indicted, assets frozen, fled in his private jet, and eventually got picked up at a cheap motel in Canada. A year or so after that, I got interviewed by the FBI, mostly questions to establish who of his employees I met, some of his lifestyle, presumably to try to make a tax fraud case, although they just ended up getting him on Ponzi charges. Story 8. Was gaslighted by my ex for 6 years, telling me I was hard of hearing. She would mumble things constantly, making me ask her to speak up. She said I was old and my hearing was going, etc., even though I never had to ask people at work in a busy office to speak up or repeat things. After 6 years, she messed up, though. We live in Hawaii, and some of her college girlfriends came out to visit and stay with us. After 2 days, her and her friends are walking and talking when finally one of her girlfriends snaps and yells, "Why are you talking so quietly? What the hell is wrong with you? No one can hear you. You never talked under your breath before ever. What the hell?" She looked at me and knew she was busted. So for years and years, it was just a petty way to put one over on me, I guess. This was a 30-year-old grown woman. I'll never understand it. Story 9. Felt off about a mentor/mother figure of my husband's. Never could put my finger on why. Shrugged it off and tried my best to act normal, sharing life details with very few second thoughts. I trusted my husband and his judgment. In the middle of a phone call, we mentioned my spring cleaning, part of which was some of my estranged mother's witchy stuff and some old supernatural merch. And within the next few sentences, she suggested to my husband, in front of me, that we separate. and then spent the rest of the phone call trying to convince him that I'm actually a practicing witch, faking being Christian, and it would be unwise to stay around me or have kids with me while I was practicing under his nose. The entire family went from a well-meaning, maybe you're just being overly nervous, to, well, crap, that was weird, and you were right. It did not feel good, and I'm upset my husband lost a relationship to someone he was so close to like that. Story 10. Recently, I dated this guy, and right before we broke up, he started acting odd, distant, less affectionate. He initially tells me he's going through a lot mentally, issues with work, his car, his baby mama. He wants to change his living situation because he's overwhelmed, but he insists that he still absolutely adores me and that I'm an absolute angel and constant source of peace in his life. Okay, fine. But he continues pulling back, and my gut is telling me something is just absolutely not right. There's something missing. His baby mama does blow him up at one point, and I overhear her say something along the lines of, "This is a betrayal of trust." And when questioned about it, he tries saying it's just because he texted a female friend, consoling her because she lost her mom. And then my alarm bells are going off. Why is your baby mama that upset over that? Why is that considered a betrayal of trust? There's no way that this is just her being crazy. Because this woman is perfectly fine with us dating and has been nothing but a sweetheart to me, but is suddenly up in arms over him doing something as innocent as consoling a friend that lost her mom. Anyway, I finally asked if things were really okay between him and I. He tells me that he just thinks things aren't stable enough for him to currently have a relationship, and that he doesn't have the energy mentally to give me the attention I deserve. Fine, okay, we leave it amicable and go our separate ways. But I still have a feeling in my stomach something wasn't right. Right before he started acting weird, he was telling me that he wanted to be with me for a very long time, that he thought we were perfect together, that he loved me. If you love someone and you're that serious about them, I think that even if you're going through tough times, you'd lean on them, right? Or at least want them around. Less than a month later, guess what? I find out that the girl he was consoling was indeed his new girlfriend. Story 11. I got laid off from a temp job I'd worked over Christmas and New Year's. And rather than just tell me they only needed cover over the festive season and rather simply tell me, hey, this will be your last week, they asked for my security pass on the pretext that it was because they were upgrading the access panel overnight, and I'd be issued with a new one in the morning. I figured all that was happening was that they no longer needed me, as the persons I'd been helping cover for were now available again, and they just didn't have the guts to say it. Sure enough, I got a call from my agency that night saying I wasn't needed on Monday and they'd find some other work for me. It wasn't so bad. It was a pretty lousy job, to be honest, but I didn't appreciate that workplace's plan of getting someone in only for a few weeks over Christmas and New Year. And with that period now over, lay me off with no warning. And with the crappy and untrue feedback they offered the agency, they made it sound like it was my fault, rather than admit they only needed a few of us in there on a very temporary basis. I no longer work temp jobs, I'm happy to say. There's nothing like that kind of work for chewing you up and spitting you out. Even if you are productive, diligent, professional, and forthright in all your dealings with agency and employer alike. Well, that's the Christmas spirit, huh? More like the Grinch's workshop. Story 12. CEO and office manager in a relationship. The previous office manager retired. Without anyone else even being given the chance to apply for office manager, the woman who used to do my job was put straight into the position even though she had only been in the door a little over 12 months. I suspected something was going on even before that happened, and other members of staff noticed things that suggested something more than a close working relationship was going on. June 2024, when the office manager was out of the office for a few days, I was asked to check her emails for anything important. Presumably, the CEO sent an email to the wrong email address one evening, her work mail instead of her personal email, confirming a reservation at a vineyard 20 miles away with an overnight stay included for 2 people. In July 2024, 4 months after she became office manager, the CEO and office manager host some BS catch-up meetings with each team in the office. Every meeting ended with both of them announcing they had been seeing each other outside of work for a couple of months, try 12 at least. My colleague and I both sat at the meeting room table biting our tongues because we already knew, along with 50% of the other employees. The CEO and office manager spout some BS about how work stays at work and their personal relationship ends when they walk through the office door. No, it doesn't work like that. The office environment is now even more awkward than before they made the announcement, and she can't manage the office properly anyway. Before anyone asks, I didn't want the office manager job. My next step has always been to walk out the door and never look back, as I have been disgruntled with the place for quite a while. Story 13. This one's a painful one for me. I worked as an optician, and I had a lady come in with a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses. She told me they belonged to her dad, who had recently passed, and she wanted to wear them to feel closer to him. She needed them adjusted to her face. One of my talents was bringing train wreck glasses back to life, so people would bring me completely mangled frames and I would make them wearable again. It's a delicate process. Given the gravity of the request, I inspected these glasses so closely, didn't see any flaws, and agreed to her request. There was hesitation from me, something in my gut was saying, don't do it. But I wanted to help her. I gave my liability disclaimer. The glasses are older, the metal could be weakened. If something happens, you can't yell at me and I can't be liable. I checked, double-checked with her that she wanted me to proceed. Yes, yes. The moment I started to apply the slightest pressure, the temple snapped clean off. I freaking knew it. Story 14. I knew this was going to be a controversial post, but a few years back, I was promoted and in a position at work to see compensation numbers for my 100-person department within the large multinational corporation I worked for. I started to suspect two compensation patterns. Employees of a diverse racial background and females who had been hired in the past 5 years were being paid more than their peers. H-1B employees, in particular from India, were being paid considerably less than their peers. I, however, thought maybe it was an aberration in my department. Fast forward a few years, prior to a mass layoff, an email was accidentally forwarded to me and others containing an attachment that contained all comp numbers for the 20,000 plus employees in our division. A quick analysis showed these patterns were unequivocally not an aberration, which was easy to see since everything on the employee was there, for example, date of birth, ethnicity, hire date, compensation over past 3 years. These patterns had, in fact, gotten more pronounced since I'd last seen the smaller data set. There were people who had ostensibly the same education and experience brought on making upwards of 30% more for the same role around the same time. It was indisputably clear what is happening. Story 15. I read a comment somewhere in this thread from someone who mentioned their boss scheduling a meeting with them, which triggered a sense of dread, only for the meeting to be them getting laid off. It reminded me of a very similar feeling I once had in very different circumstances. Back in the summer of 2022, I flew up to Alaska with a duffel bag full of camping gear, planning to spend 3 weeks canning around the state solo with a rental car. Flying into Anchorage, I spent my first 2 weeks on the Kenai Peninsula south of the town before heading up to Denali National Park for the final week. I spent my last 3 nights on the Kenai at the Skilak Lake campground. You turn off the main highway, and about a quarter mile down, the road turns to gravel. Keep going another 5 miles or so, and you get to a beautiful little free campground with about a dozen campsites, each right on the water. Though my site had a nice open view of the lake, there was dense plant growth on both sides of my campsite, which went right down to the shoreline. Throughout my time at that campsite, it wasn't uncommon to hear these random splashing noises coming from the lake. A small wave crashing against the shore, maybe a salmon jumping out of the water and splashing back in. I just finished eating dinner and was sitting around the fire on my final evening at this campsite when I heard one such splash. But this one was different. I could not even begin to tell you what sounded different about it, but my unconscious mind certainly picked up on it. Something about this sound just triggered 100,000 years of caveman survival brain in me. The sound came from around the corner to the left, behind the plants. I got up out of my chair and positioned myself in my campsite where I had the best angle to see around the corner from the furthest distance. As I did so, I pulled the bear spray from the holster on my hip, but left the safety on the trigger. Through a slight thin spot in the plants, I saw my visitor, medium brown in color, the size of a medium to large dog, but on disproportionately long legs. A moose calf, I thought. It came out into full view on my little beach, and I found my assessment was slightly off. Bear cub. "Oh, hey, bear," I said, not at all in a commanding tone, but it was enough to announce my presence and spook him off back where he came from. A minute later, he came back. "Hey, bear," this time in a much more assertive voice. "You're not welcome here." As if he understood not just my tone, but the words as well, he turned back the way he came, never to be seen again. Though a few minutes later, I did hear another splash that triggered that same gut reaction in me. That one was a false alarm. Thankfully, the only evidence of Mama Bear I ever saw was a paw print in the gravel a minute's walk from camp. I spent a lot of time outdoors over the years. I've seen plenty of bears from a distance and other wildlife from uncomfortably close. When I hear something like that one weird splash that just didn't sit right with me, I trust my gut instincts. And if you're enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 16. I worked for a year at a fine dining restaurant as a sous chef. From the moment I was hired, things were just off. I did research on the chef, my boss, and he left a highly awarded and coveted position in NYC, seemingly out of the blue. Well, I thought, well, that's odd. He claims he loves the West Coast and wants to start his master project out here. Over the course of the year, the second in command is fired out of the blue. The two more senior sous chefs walk out together on New Year's Eve. The AM sous chef is put on a PIP for the littlest thing and fired a month later. So eventually, I'm the last manager left. This chef was a psycho for sure, but I guess my tolerance for dealing with crazy stuff is high, which might not be a good thing. I just kept breaking my back and working ungodly hours, but I was learning tons, so I was okay with it. But I kept thinking, how is this sustainable and why is he pushing everyone out? Something is not right. Eventually, I see the GM counting all the plates and doing inventory of equipment. A server tells me the last time they saw a manager counting plates, the restaurant closed. The next day, the restaurant closed. The chef was detonating all the relationships with the kitchen managers so they would quit or he could fire them all because he couldn't pay their salaries. The restaurant was losing like $100,000 a month. I knew something was off. Story 17. My best friend got an amazing job at a law firm as a receptionist and then later promoted to paralegal. Like, she got super lucky and she was probably set, but she messed everything up by getting involved with her boss. Now, I'm all for love and screwing the corporate ladder, but it brought out a lot of bad behaviors like lying. Like, she would call me about drama happening at work, colleagues reporting her to HR for bad behavior, and asking me how to get out of it with me knowing she was messing with her boss. I talked to her for hours about how to change and hide and what to legally say to protect herself. Having an extensive background in HR, I know the key buttons of what to say to avoid getting in trouble. Her job was saved. Good for her. She came clean one day when she and her boss broke up. I was livid with her. She assured me it was over, and I told her that was BS, and I said I could predict when she was going to get back with him, and the only reason why she was contacting me was because she was lonely and can't deal with herself. Needless to say, she stopped talking to me, but I didn't want to talk to her. But boy, was I right. She got back with him eventually. Me and her caught up about a year later, and everything was fine until it wasn't. She was back to lying again. I lost it when I went to pick her up from work, and she said she was busy with her very prestigious paralegal job, but was actually messing with her boss she had a turbulent relationship with. She had me waiting on her for an hour and a half. I guess shame on me thinking people could change. Story 18. I knew, for a fact, my brother's marriage would fall apart and that they weren't ready for fatherhood. Him and his now ex-wife were a very solid couple, but I knew when they started talking about having kids, I knew it wouldn't end well. I knew my brother was just trying to fill a void within himself and thought that putting out kids and living vicariously through them would solve all his problems, and it stings even more because we used to have long conversations about the world, the economy, and how it's likely not a good idea to bring a child into this world. But as soon as him and his wife got married, all of that went completely out the window. I tried to reason with him and ask, are you sure kids are a huge responsibility, etc., etc.? But whenever I brought up these concerns, them and my family turned it down and scolded me because apparently I hate children and I don't want my brother to be happy. It was like being in a cult that's desperate to complete a ritual. And a year after marriage, my twin nieces were born. A year after that, my brother had a total mental breakdown because they couldn't afford to take care of the kids and had a drinking habit, put himself into thousands of dollars of credit card debt, went to rehab for a month, got a divorce, and then stayed with my mom for a year under the pretenses that he was going to save money and move out. Well, it turns out that was also a big lie and they weren't saving money at all and falling deeper. And when my mom caught him and confronted him about it after finding his stashes of drinks, he once again had another breakdown, went to the hospital, and is now in rehab for the second time. And as far as I know, my nieces are being taken care of by his ex-wife and her family. Story 19. My company wanted to change EMRs and only had management who were new. Tested before deciding to go all in. They thought we could switch over in 2 months after signing, which was to create forms, locations, and move all functionality away from our current EMR, because the sales team told them it was Zombocom, the EMR. I saw it after they announced the switch and decided it could be like 30% of what they said, but not much else because it was clearly built to be one location and didn't have an elegant solution for viewing anything, other than stock forms of which would have been best practice in the 1990s, but were basically useless now. They told us they had been built for our industry but yet hadn't heard of 42 CFR Part 2. At that point, I checked out the presentations and thought it would never be implemented because it can't do what they claimed, because of the limited amount they showed us and supported that it was very limited. I couldn't even find examples of how to use it online from third parties. After the meeting, the project manager asked me what I thought, and I told them that they shouldn't believe sales and we would not be able to get this to work earlier than March, as it was now July and they wanted to go live in September for all 24 locations. I got left out of implementation and spin up and didn't see it again until 1 week before September, and I asked if we could back out now because it's not even close to ready, and was told only 8 of the locations would go live as a test while the bugs got sorted out and the go live date was pressed back from September 1st to mid-September and full rollout starting the first week of October. Then, October 15, we dropped it because it would not have been fully ready until early next year. I do have to say, the engineers really tried to get what the sales team promised, but they were only able to turn lead into gold and not fundamentally redesign the schema for their platform. Story 20. A long time ago, I was dating this guy who had a pretty close-knit friend group. We were all just out of high school, so it still very much had the same dynamics. So the group was like 5 or 6 main guys, a few others that would float in and out, and a girl. I got a bad vibe about her. They all said, she's totally one of the guys. We don't even see her as a girl. She was only referred to by her nickname, never her real name. I told my BF that I didn't like her, and he assured me that I was being crazy. He even told their friends and that girl that I didn't like her. Needless to say, I wasn't their favorite person after that. A little backstory, there were lots of girlfriends that came and went in this group as well. I became friends with a lot of them and definitely remained cordial with the rest of the girls. I was never rude or mean to anyone in that group, that girl included. There was one couple that had been long-distance dating for a long time. She was from a different country but came to visit her BF. We can call him N. Multiple times throughout the year, and N went to visit her as well. I never got to meet her, but she seemed really sweet and everyone liked her. Fast forward a few months and I'm on a weekend trip with one of the girls named P. So we're drinking, wine, bonding, etc. P found out through her BF that at a recent party, N and that girl hooked up, and that they continued to do so on a regular basis. N's girlfriend was even planning a trip out to visit in the next month. And the thing that really got to me was that when P found out, apparently everyone told her, don't tell Harlequin Squirrel because she doesn't like that girl and it'll make things awkward. I freaking knew it. P and I remained good friends even after my breakup, but seriously, screw all of those guys. Story 21. An influencer I used to follow on Instagram, I do not use Instagram anymore, began posting pictures of her first child after she was born. As the child got older, but was still very young, 1 to 2 years old, I began to feel that something looked off about the baby. It was subtle and difficult to describe, but she just looked sickly to me. Her skin was very pale, translucent, and she didn't have much hair. She always looked tired with dark circles in her eyes, just like weak and frail looking. I said to myself, she looks like a cancer patient. So it was this influencer's first baby, and she appeared very invested in the child. All the posts were positive, celebratory, etc., and nothing indicated anything was wrong, but IDK, she just didn't look right to me. No one else would point this out in the comments, or if they did, the influencer deleted them before I ever saw, and the baby was clearly perfect in her mom's eyes. Fast forward a year or two, the child was diagnosed with cancer and needed over a year of treatment. The mom made the child's cancer treatment into a huge part of her content to an extreme degree. So there's no way they knew for a while before she announced it. She made a full recovery and was totally fine the last time I checked, but I just knew there was something wrong with that poor baby. Story 22. My first super amazing Hinge guy who I went out with as my first ever and probably last Hinge date, who said, people always ask me, what is the catch? And I say, no catch, I'm just amazing like that, job jokingly. Mind you, we spoke for 3 weeks before we went out for 2 to 6 hour activities dates, 0 red flags, taking it slow, etc. It was really awesome, but I felt like, am I sabotaging myself if I keep feeling like there must be